everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am your host, Taylor Rockwell. Joining me on the other end of the line, I've got a man with one eye on top of the Premier League table and another on the relegation zone in League One. It's Ryan Bailey. Hello, Ryan.
Hello, T-Riz. How you doing today?
Got
a new one for you. New one.
That's a new one.
You like it?
You zigged when I thought you were going to zag. But yeah, is that basically what your weekends are? You're tracking Man City for your work for The Athletic, and maybe a little bit of like adopted fandom, and then are you simultaneously trying to see what's going on in League One?
Yeah, very much a split between League One and the Premier League, thinking of new nicknames for you, and also Fantasy Premier League. I'm very, very anxious this weekend. My Fantasy League is a draft league with lots of media types in it. I've done very well in this regular season. I'm in the first weekend of playoffs, and I am 19 points behind my opponent with only the second part of the double game week to go, so I'm very nervous. I'm going to end up with nothing in this miserable little Fantasy League I'm in.
All right, but here's my question about fantasy, because Daryl and I think, kind of actively avoid it to varying degrees.
Well done,
How do you here's what I do, though. I will get into it. I do the usual thing. Get into it, up for it, make the roster changes after week 1, maybe make the roster changes after week 2, and then I kind of fall off, and then eventually I forget until midway through the season. By then I'm 400 points behind. So Ryan, do you have a system in place? Do you schedule it out? How do you remember to set your lineups and get all that stuff done?
Note in my calendar every Thursday, basically, is what I go with, because otherwise I'd probably do the same thing. But I've got, there's a incentive because it's a league which I paid £100 to get into.
Oh, wow.
And there's money at the end. But this is the only round if I go out and I don't get money. So it could be, that's pretty much summing up my life. You're doing quite well and then not getting anything at the end of it. Poor me. But I will tell you something about my league that's interesting. There is a Premier League player.
That's good.
In it.
That's a good thing to do.
There is an active Premier League player in our league. I won't reveal his identity, but I will reveal that at the start of the season, he signed himself. 2 weeks ago, he tried to sell himself, I should say. Sent a couple of offers out. He also put himself on the trading block. No takers.
Now, here's my question, and I may get you in trouble, but if there's money on the line, is this considered gambling? Could he get in trouble for this?
This is why I'm not mentioning his name, because I don't know if that's a thing.
All right, perfect. Well, it could be any number of people who tried to drop themselves. Could be the entire starting 11 for Manchester United, quite possibly. I guess we'll find out, or not find out, but we will probably talk Man United here in a little bit. But I wanted to start off with the team I already alluded to at the top of the table. I believe no longer on top of the table. I get confused with this title race. Man City 1-0 win over Tottenham. I'm guessing from the vibe I got from some of the post-match interviews, they would have maybe preferred to have won the game last week and then maybe also won this one, but I think they would have taken the midweek win over winning today. Ryan, did it feel that way to you, or do you think City will be happy to still be alive in the title race even if they're out of the Champions League?
I think definitely they'd be happy with the win today, no question about that, because they would have ceded some big ground to Liverpool had they not won in this one. And obviously, I think it's the albatross around Pep's neck, that not being able to win the Champions League since 2011. So they very much would have wanted to win that too. But this game had a weird vibe to it because it wasn't like a perfect Man City performance. Spurs were giving them a little bit of trouble. It felt too low key for a game where there was so much at stake. City obviously with the title race, and Tottenham with maintaining their place in the top 4, which is quite precarious as well. It felt like, I don't know, the energy around the game didn't feel like it was as big as it should have been. Now, maybe that's because, when you go to the bar at 7:30 in the morning, everyone's like, yeah, we've watched these two teams twice already in the past 11 days. There's a bit of fatigue and maybe the players feel that too. But did you get that impression too?
I absolutely did, and it was really indicative, or really telling to me when there was the Kyle Walker handball shout, which I think could go either way. I'm of mixed opinions on that one. But Mauricio Pochettino, kind of sitting down and laughing with one of his assistants about whether or not it should have been a handball. I have to believe that if they were really up for this game, he's not kind of sitting there making jokes. Yeah. He's very angry, he's very agitated, and it's a big part of why maybe they didn't end up getting a point out of this game. So I absolutely felt Tottenham made a lot of changes for this one, dealing with a lot of injuries. It did not feel as though they were necessarily going full tilt to get full 3 points.
No, certainly not. And by the way, on that Poch thing and the Walker handball, the quote I think I saw on the BBC afterwards was, "For all of humanity, it was a handball!" ! Which just makes me think that Poch has gone full Ron Burgundy now. It's by the beard of Zeus, that was a handball! For all of humanity!
Well, first of all, I like that he's gone full Zeus, and I want to incorporate that into the show as much as possible.
Yeah.
But I also think maybe there was an element, Guardiola afterwards referred to the loss to Tottenham last week as our mental defeat. It's confusing to me to keep saying last week because we're recording this Sunday evening, so I feel like I forget when weeks actually start. But last week, for purposes of the show.
Time to flat circle.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. But referring to it as our mental defeat and talking about how like the players had to pick themselves up after last week, I think that kind of informs the way he was looking at this game. And I think you could see the reasons why Man City fans certainly, but some of the players and obviously Guardiola will be frustrated by the way things went, because this was a game I felt like where City, outside of a very early mistake from I think John Stones, they were pretty rock solid throughout the game. And because they didn't really present any vulnerabilities, I think that's a big reason why Tottenham weren't as capable of scoring on the break. Ederson had a big part to play in that, but I do think this was an example of what happens when City don't make stupid mistakes and gift the opposition breakaway chances and goals.
Yeah, which is exactly what happened on Wednesday, where both teams were pretty guilty of that kind of thing. Yeah, and it was more of a back five than the back three from Tottenham in this one, wasn't it? And quite a lot of lineup changes, most of them forced on Poch, of course. But could we talk about Heung-min Son, by the way?
Sure.
I mean,
what would you like to talk about? How very, very, very good he is?
How very, very good he is. Maybe it's a bit passé to say he's underrated at this point because he's very much rated. But, I mean, we saw him beat Laporte again in this game for a few times to get better of him. We saw, was it 12 goals and 6 assists this season? If he were to be sold, how much would he go for? I looked on Transfermarkt. His value is 58.5 million. Do you think that's about right? I think maybe a little bit north of that.
I would argue that whatever he goes for, it will inevitably, if he were sold this summer, for example, I don't think he will be, but if he were, I would argue he would still go for less than he probably should. Because I think Harry, I was having a conversation similar to this with a friend of mine who's a Spurs fan, who is kind of terrified of what's going to happen this offseason. I think he is of the opinion that the entire squad will be bought by Real Madrid. Heung-min Son was not one of the players that I think first comes to mind when teams are going to come in poaching. It's probably Harry Kane. It's probably Christian Eriksen. And then maybe one of the center backs, who knows? But I think for that reason, he is certainly beloved by the club. I think they will value him and try to get as much money out of him as they can if they do end up selling him. But I think because he is still, as you said, he's rated, but he's not he hasn't sort of gotten the hype to extend him to that next level. So I think he'll still end up being sold for less than a lot of other players who have certainly not contributed nearly as much this season.
Yeah, certainly not. And I think it's a 5-2 record without Harry Kane now, which obviously has a lot to do with Heung-min Son in that advanced role as well. So yeah, I was very impressed with that. But if we can talk about City as well, Phil Foden, second Premier League start, first Premier League goal. I thought it was another indication of how deep City are. And obviously, you had players like Zinchenko full back again as well, who's accounted for himself very well. But Phil Foden, I thought, he just looks so mature, doesn't he? For that goal, he had that sort of crossover move with Aguero when the cross came in, and Aguero and him went in different directions, and Sanchez was sort of standing in the middle of them going, I don't know which direction to go in. I think I'm going to stand still. So that was good. And also, yet another example of City scoring early. If my math is correct, that's 19 goals in the opening 15 minutes at home this season. That's phenomenal.
It is. And I really enjoyed it because it's, for those who haven't seen, it's a ball into the box. It's headed back across by Sergio Aguero. Kun to his friends, or Kun, if you're Phil Foden. That's what he called him in the post-match interview, which was, I kept trying to figure out who he was talking about. He was like, yeah, Kun heads it back. And I did not know what he was saying for a moment. I was very confused. But it was,
I'm not sure I go with that pronunciation, even if I was from Manchester.
I know, exactly. But I did enjoy it. It was a great header back across. And so you could look at it as oh yeah, it's a diving header, but sort of a tap in. But you're absolutely right. The kind of interplay and the change, and then tracking the run, making sure he stays on side, making sure he drifts away from the defender. I was really impressed by all that. And it led me to wonder, we've heard so much about how the English national team, or the England national team, has benefited from the influence of Pep Guardiola, from Jurgen Klopp, and from Mauricio Pochettino in the league, coaching in the league. And I do wonder, I agree with that, but I do wonder if we're seeing sort of the next level of that, of a player like Phil Foden, who's 18 years old, but like can come in and play for this Man City team and look like he belongs. He can play one-touch passing and link up possession. He never really looks that like stressed out when he's under pressure.
Yeah.
Can obviously score goals and create opportunities. Just watching him play, it really stood out to me as like, this is a kid who could easily be this midfield hub or play wide and be very good there for England for the next 10, 15 years. And that's a thing that I think he's an exceptionally talented player, obviously, but I think that little bit of tutelage, or that lot bit of tutelage under Pep Guardiola, has really kind of pushed him to this next level that I think should have England fans feeling very optimistic.
Definitely, and I think it was a big gamble on Foden's part, obviously, to stay with City this season. He could have done a Sancho-style move, but chose to stay under Pep's tutelage, and that's a compliment to Pep, of course, that he chose to stay. And you can see similar things he's done for people like Zinchenko, completely moving him out of position, doing the old David Alaba, moving him back to fullback, which he's done to a few other players too, obviously, as well. But someone who's absolutely primed and ready to come into the team when they need to. So that's a great credit to the man called Fraudiola, called the bald fraud many times midweek, which I definitely have a beef with that kind of thing. I mean, are you on board at all with this Fraudiola line of thinking?
I didn't even know that was the thing, if that helps you with my answer.
A lot of, these two terms were trending on UK Twitter after they crashed out of the Champions League. Hasn't been in a final since 2011. Can't win it without Lionel Messi. They're calling him a checkbook manager. Someone who spends up a load of money and doesn't get any results with it. I absolutely refute all of that. I mean, this is a business where we're dealing in fine margins. We're talking about that extra 1%. We're talking about a tie with Spurs in the midweek. I'm sure if you've gone over this before in the I'm sure this is well trodden in this area. But there were Aguero penalty non-miss from going through. They were a Llorente handball, which, might have been not given from a different camera angle from going through, a Sterling offside from going through. If they don't win the league this season, it might be like the Riyad Mahrez penalty at Liverpool earlier in the season that was decisive. Very, very fine margins. And then you look at his record in the Champions League, and he's gone out on away goals 3 times now. That's a pretty fine margin to go out on. And you can talk about he's not as good at managing two-legged affairs as Mourinho, as other kind of managers are, but it just feels so fine, and they're not the actions of a fraud for me. And you look at this City team; they're in the end of April now, still on for a domestic treble here. There's not many teams in English history who've been in that position. Certainly not many who the week before this would have been in line for a quadruple. You can't really name any more than that. And as for the whole Messi thing, you can't win it without Messi. Messi's only won it once without him, so I don't buy that line of inquiry either. So I mean. I do like Pep Guardiola a lot, and I think it's very unfair when he's tarred with that brush. And I think coming back and having a result against Spurs, those players must have been so down this past weekend, having to face Tottenham again. And to not it wasn't a stellar display, but they got the job done, and they're still on course to win the league. I think that's a tremendous effort to rouse them to get a win over a team like Tottenham over the weekend as well.
I would agree, because I think a lot of times it would be easy to think like, oh, Spurs, they're still in the Champions League. They're seem like they're going to be okay top 4. We'll see what happens. But like, there's not as much to play for. City have it all to play for. They're trying to win the title. And so that does seem like, oh, then City are going to be up for it and Tottenham won't. But so often, especially after the result you mentioned, it can be the opposite, that you're trying to get back up for it. And it feels like, well, now we're out of this competition. They're still alive in it. They were never really in the title race, like for the last month or so. So like, it would be, I can see how it'd be very difficult for Man City to get back up to that next level. But that's where they had to be. And to be able to get the result, I think, is incredibly impressive. To your point about Pep, I kind of equate it with like a very accomplished NCAA basketball coach, that like you can win your conference over and over and over again, be a one or two seed, but March Madness is its own entity. The UEFA Champions League is its own entity. And when you get to the knockout rounds, I think it's a knockout tournament. It is no longer necessarily who has the best players over the course of a season. Yeah. It is who has the best players on that day and kind of figures it out. I do think Guardiola does overthink it from time to time. I'm not saying he did that in either one of these ties, but I think there are times when we've seen like, ooh, this doesn't really make any sense. And it felt like that a little bit in the first leg, especially, that not even that he did it, but just that I saw people sort of taking what appeared to me to be sort of like, yeah, maybe a little bit controversial, but mostly a straightforward lineup. And turning it into like, I saw one site listed as like a 2-4-1-2 or something nonsensical like that. And it was just like, no, but you guys know what he's doing. Like, this isn't that hard to see. And so I do think he gets a little bit painted with an unfair brush there, or tarred with an unfair brush, I think you put it. So I'm definitely not of the bald fraud persuasion, but I definitely also would not have wanted to be a person who was kind of dealing with him in the wake of that loss, because I think he definitely thought it was kind of in their grasp.
Yeah, to be completely fair, he is bald. That part of the statement is true. But I'm just refuting the fraud part of it. And another, I mean, when you look at the first leg against Spurs in the Champions League lineup, I too was like on Twitter going on, ooh, Vincent Kompany, really? I know you're expecting an aerial threat, and that's fair enough, but that didn't really work out, did it? And not starting De Bruyne until the game was nearly dead. I think he's been slightly vindicated by the fact that De Bruyne went out of this game clearly not very well. So that's kind of vindicated that decision for me for a start.
I do want to move on. I just want to mention that De Bruyne injury really quickly, because he goes out by playing the ball out of bounds himself, and he does that by kicking it as hard as he can out of bounds, clearly showing his frustration. But it seemed like he had pulled a muscle, like overextending on a shot, or maybe he'd hyperextended and hurt his knee. Yeah. So I was just sort of, with that in mind, confused as to why he would then kick the ball as hard as he could when he was playing it out of bounds to be substituted. That felt like a thing where you would maybe, if you're carrying that injury, just sort of gently play it out of bounds, maybe not risk furthering the injury.
Well, Tate, like the Joker and like my 3-year-old daughter, some people just like to watch the world burn.
So a fun weekend has it been then, based on that comment?
It's always all right over here.
Well, we've got lots more Premier League to talk, lots of other leagues to talk. But first, we should talk about today's sponsor. It's our old friends over at SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the place to go if you ever need tickets for any sort of event. Could be a concert, could be a theatrical performance, could be stand-up comedy, could be sports, whatever it is, SeatGeek has you covered, because they pull in millions of tickets from all over the web. They rate each deal on a scale from 1 to 10 and display them on an interactive seat map, so it's simple to find what you're looking for.
Definitely. One of the best things they do, Tate, the price match guarantee as well. If you spot a better deal elsewhere, they will cover the difference. That's pretty significant when there's a few competitors out there. And it's one of the best things I like about this site is it's very easy on the eye. There's another advertiser we have, Robinhood, where it's a beautiful looking site as well as being very functional. It's the same thing here, I find. And I've got a couple of tabs open myself. Johnny Marr is in my hometown next week. My hometown, not London, the one I live in currently. But are you a Johnny Marr fan?
I say because I don't even know who Johnny Marr is, and I feel like I'm about to hear a sharp inhale of air from the other end of the phone. There it is. That might have been an exhale. I'm not sure.
How about Phil Collins? You know him?
Yeah, him I am familiar with. Jackets are always required with him.
Johnny Marr was in a band called The Smiths, who were a band from Manchester.
Oh, yeah.
Very good guitar player. Does solo concerts now. Doesn't get on with Morrissey so well anymore.
Now I feel bad. No,
you're fine. He's playing in town, and the tickets are quite hard to come by, and they've got them here on SeatGeek. And also, a little comedian called Eliza Sledzinger, whose name I'm not sure I'm pronouncing 100% correctly. She's got a couple of good Netflix specials. Got my eye on her coming to town too. So a couple of things I'm looking out for on this old SeatGeek.
I like it. And Ryan, the best of all is that you could get $10 off your first SeatGeek purchase.
What?
You can use the promo code TSS for $10 on your first purchase. You can use that for concert tickets, sports, comedy, whatever you want. I guess you mentioned concerts and comedy. I think Daryl's got some friends in town this week, which is why he will be on the show less this week. And so I think they are going to be using SeatGeek to look at some sports events here in Richmond, up in D.C. area, maybe in North Carolina as well. We shall see, but our listeners can use that promo code TSS for $10 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Thank you very much to SeatGeek for sponsoring today's episode. Ryan Bailey, where shall we head next when it comes to the Premier League?
Shall we head to the land of Welsh people, Cardiff?
Let's do it. That is perfect for me, because this felt like a big trap game for Liverpool. Coming off of Champions League last week, heading into this one, Cardiff at home, felt like it could be difficult. Seemed like it was going to be difficult for a good chunk of this game. My wife and I were getting ready for family Easter celebration today. We had this game on in the background. And there were so many oohs and that when the shot goes wide and the whole crowd does the ooh or ah. And she walked in multiple times to ask, wait, they still haven't scored? Because Liverpool kept getting chances. And it did feel like a game that in seasons past maybe they just keep kind of not taking those chances. They get frustrated. Maybe Cardiff nick one in a counterattack, or maybe they don't, but it finishes 0-0 and that's points dropped. Here, I feel like Liverpool stayed calm, Jurgen Klopp stayed calm, and eventually they're able to get the win. Ryan, did you read it that way?
Absolutely read it that way, and I enjoyed very much after the game Jurgen Klopp in his interview calling it a potential banana skin. I like hearing that in a German accent. It was very fun. But yeah, did well to stay calm. I think this is another example of how this team doesn't panic at 0-0, which is what Jamie Carragher said on commentary for last week's game. But so many chances early on. You were like, is this not going to be a Cardiff? Is Neil Warnock going to have a good day? Is it going to be one of those days? We don't like those days, do we, when Neil Warnock has a good day? So, yeah, Firmino with that early chance where he beat the offside trap. There was Mane where I think he got there was a Salah cross that came in. Mm-hmm. Salah smacked one right at the keeper. I think he had another one where he's on the break as well and got that was another thing, by the way. When there was that chance where Salah was on the break when it was 0-0 and there was two defenders caught up with him. I think when that was described afterwards, that was described because the grass was dry in Cardiff. They hadn't watered the pitch. So then we've got another one. You know, it's not just wind that puts off Liverpool now, it's dry grass. We've got another excuse loaded in the cannon. I'm very pleased with that.
Until it rained too heavily, and then the grass was too wet.
Yeah,
so now we're moving into Cinderella territory.
Yeah, I mean, they're training.
Wait, that's not Cinderella. I got that wrong. Goldilocks. I apologize.
I was with you. That's fine.
Clearly, I do not have a 3-year-old daughter, is what we just learned there.
Yeah, but obviously getting the breakthrough with that lovely training ground routine, wasn't it, for the first goal? The Trent Alexander-Arnold low corner going in, and it looks like he's heading it into the middle of nowhere, but then comes Gigi Wijnaldum with that first time hit. Very much a training ground move, which just makes it better because that will annoy Neil Warnock even more that went in.
Yep, it sure will. I was with the commentators at first. I thought maybe Trent Alexander-Arnold mishit that corner. You see it again. I think he does mishit it in the sense that he puts it maybe a yard behind where he wanted to.
It doesn't look clean. Definitely.
It does not. But Wijnaldum able to adjust to it. But I really do think it is definitely a design play. That it's hit behind him is impressive, and that he takes it like bounces up at the last second there. So he ends up taking it on the half volley, and that he keeps it low but gets the power behind it and puts it on frame. Again, that's one where if Liverpool are a little bit more pressure, if they're a little bit more frustrated by the way things have gone, if Jurgen Klopp is a little bit more animated, I do wonder if he hits that over. And one thing that stood out to me, I think 6 minutes before, Sadio Mane gets a chance on the counter. He shoots it over. Definitely could have done better. Maybe should have laid it off. But you can't fault his decision making because he's Sadio Mane. But they cut to Jurgen Klopp, and he's just very calmly clapping and being positive and keeping the players going. And then later on, I think Jordan Henderson misses one after Liverpool are already leading, and you see him. That's when he kind of loses it and gets animated. And I do think that he was really working to not add more pressure where there was already lots of pressure. And that, again, I think makes a big difference when you're trying to stay in that title race.
Yeah, definitely shows the evolution of this team, as we say. And I think if one person had a bad day at this game, it was Sean Morrison, wasn't it? I mean,
it was
not just for his role in the second goal, but that missed open goal header where the cross came in, the corner came in. And they were trying to pass it off on the TV coverage as Alisson getting a touch and sort of pushing it away from his head, where it kind of hit the back of his neck in the end of it. To me, it doesn't look like there was a significant enough touch to put it that far away from his head. It just looked like an embarrassing miss to me. I don't know if I'm reading that wrong.
No, I think it was definitely a pretty bad miss from him, and I'm with you that he definitely did not have the best day. I think the only person I would say who had a worse day than him is Gary Neville, who absolutely hated calling this game. He was the color commentator in the footage that I watched, and he really, for the second goal, the penalty conceded by Morrison, it's definitely Morrison, failing to clear, Mohamed Salah blocks. Then it, to me, is a nailed-on penalty. I don't know how you can argue it. Morrison has Salah's jersey in different points at different times. At one point, he has him almost in a bear hug. The only person who did that worse this weekend was AJ De La Garza. But you see Morrison, to me, it's definitely a penalty. And Gary Neville make just a few comments in there of oh, I can see why the referee maybe would have given that, but he's done some good work there. And then even as Salah steps up to take it, Neville, I think in the background says something or Mane takes it. I think he says Sadio Mane never really misses these. And then he scores it. And there felt like a lot of reverse jinxes and little aside comments that I have to believe were born of the result earlier in the day.
I mean, as much as the US viewers criticise someone like Steve Nash for being biased for Spurs on the coverage of the Champions League, you very much got a very heavy bias whenever you've got Gary Neville involved in a game like this. And I enjoyed in these post-match comments, which I think we'll touch on later, that he referred to them as that mob, as he sort of looked over his shoulder, which I thought was very funny as well. But that Sean Morrison foul on Salah, it was like a good 5 seconds of bear hug, it seemed.
Yes, it was.
It was like if he was Patrick Swayze, he was very much making pottery with the person in front of him.
I wish I could disagree, but like I would say the only thing is that maybe there's a little bit more like subtlety in the touch from Patrick Swayze, whereas Morrison I think was like if he were making that pot ends up like manhandled and crushed into just sort of like an amorphous blob. I should also add. I consulted my notes while you were talking. James Milner with the penalty. My mistake. Neville said Milner doesn't miss very often as he stepped up to take the penalty. Again, feeling like a reverse jinx, but did not work. Liverpool with the win. Title race remains alive. However, Manchester United definitely not in the title race. Maybe not in the top 4 race either based on the result today. 4-0 loss away to Everton. I watched this game. I did not enjoy this game. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Ryan, to start. Did you see this coming? Were you surprised by... Obviously, I'm going to guess you were surprised by the 4-0 win, but were you surprised that Everton got the win? Or did you feel like this also was a trap game for United?
I love this term trap game, by the way. I can get it from context, but that's not one I've heard before. I like that a lot, by the way. But
what would you refer to it as? If it's a game that like
a potential banana skin.
Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Just like Jurgen Klopp. Sorry. I definitely didn't see the result coming. You know, Everton are incredibly inconsistent. I mean, they put in some good results lately, but like 2 game weeks ago, they lost at Fulham. So it's hard to see this one coming, and it's hard to see where their consistency, easy for me to say, has been a problem all season long. But I could just imagine Pep Guardiola, for the kind of week he's had, he's licking his lips at that result because obviously it's the Manchester derby midweek, and the City very much need to win that game in hand, and they've got a Manchester United team which were pretty darn appalling coming into this one. I mean, you've got a bit of a hoarse voice today. I'm assuming it's mostly Everton versus Manchester United related.
It's the first time in a while, like I had a lot of friends texting me about this one. Friends, I should put in quotes after
stop
today.
Humble bragging about your friends again. Jeez.
But it was usually I don't get too emotionally wrapped up in the game. And usually if there's like I have a friend who's a Chelsea fan who will just text me hi whenever Manchester is losing. And usually I'll kind of like, make a sarcastic comment about Chelsea, or I'll be like, yeah, this isn't great. Today was the first time that I not texted him angrily, but was just sort of like, I hate this team. I really hate this team. Like it was definitely emotional. I'm not sure if that's because I like woke up late and was kind of, woke up, the opposite of late, for me at least, woke up early, excited to watch it, and then kind of instantly turned into hate watching this game. So that was decidedly not fun. Not as much screaming as you might think, but it certainly didn't help my voice. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. Nobody in a Man United shirt turned up for this game. 6 defeats in 8 games now as well. It's pretty poor, isn't it? And when I checked in on Twitter in the second half, Mourinho was trending on UK Twitter, and I was like, okay, what's Mourinho done? Turned out he's done nothing. It was just lots of references to the fact that, the one I saw a few times was, remember when Mourinho said that one of his greatest achievements in football was finishing second with this Man United squad, and we all laughed. Well, there you go. I mean, this is interesting, this idea. I'd like to get your take on it, because we know that Mourinho left Solskjaer's team in a bit of a mess, and he's getting blamed. There's a lot of blame being assigned to Mourinho for the state of this team, but if you're going to blame him from that, don't you have to give him credit for the run that Solskjaer went on as well? Is there logic in that?
I think there is, and I think it's tricky, because I was one who was ready for. Gary Neville said he never wanted Mourinho sacked. I did. I didn't think it was working. It felt like it wasn't like the right place, right time for him. It felt a little bit to me like Jose Mourinho was past it. I that said was like excited by Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. I was excited with the run he went on, but I was not pleased when they gave him the full-time job. And we can talk more about that or not. It doesn't really matter. But it's not that I had anything against him. It felt like there were so many like other issues at the club that were not being addressed. And so I think if you look at it through that lens, you look at where the club is right now, I think you have to look back and see Jose Mourinho and see some of his criticisms and some of his concerns about this team, and think that maybe it wasn't just, Mourinho whining in third season and everything kind of falling off the rails. Maybe there's a little bit more justification to it, because when Paul Pogba is performing and is up for it and looks like the best player in the world, which is I think what Ole Gunnar Solskjaer got him back to, or at least under Solskjaer, he kind of returned to that. You look at Jose Mourinho, you think, you're crazy. How could you not harness this? But then today, where he is fairly anonymous, against Barcelona when he's fairly anonymous, suddenly it does make you look at that squad and think, like, maybe there's a little bit more truth to this. And I can't tell if that's just like the fickle nature of football and fandom, but I think there's probably something more to it than that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Mourinho's he's not to be blamed. He's just another symptom of the problem being how poorly the board has dealt with things in the post-Ferguson era. I mean, this team is still an amalgam of Fergie players that are signed by Moyes, of Van Gaal, and it's just a big mess. It's I think I've made this point before, and I probably have, but it's how not to do things with a lot of money, where you look at someone like City, who I know I harp on about a lot, but they have a philosophy. They're aiming to a certain style of play. They sign a certain type of player, whereas Man United is still signing players to get Indonesian diesel engine partner sponsorships and that kind of thing, not necessarily for the right reasons. And it's just ended up as a big mess of a club. And then there's all these discussions coming from this game as how much does Solskjaer need to spend in the summer? What does he need to do to change? It's just going to keep repeating this thing, isn't it? We're spending a lot of money having another few pieces of this puzzle jammed in, not necessarily in the right slots. And I don't see where the end game is with this. And also another thing I'll raise with the Solskjaer thing, and you touched on it there, about the odd timing of his permanent appointment. There was no reason whatsoever they couldn't have waited until the end of the season to do that. But if you remember when he was first brought in, the big question we were asking is, what does he need to do to earn the permanent gig? And sort of the consensus was get top four and get the FA Cup. So he's got a trophy and or Champions League qualification. And the way things are going, I mean, they're only 2 points off the top four at the moment, but it doesn't look like they've got the momentum to do that and not going to get the FA Cup. So it seems like both of those objectives haven't been met, yet he's got the permanent job. And I'm just shocked they didn't make more of an effort to go after someone like Pochettino in the summer.
Yeah, I would agree for the most part with everything you said. And I think it's representative of United under Ed Woodward, because Woodward is not a director of football. They still do not have a director of football, and that is sort of my frustration. Woodward, I think, makes emotional decisions, and I think he makes a lot of emotional decisions based on the fans. And when the fans
do you think they're emotional or knee-jerk?
Yeah, I guess to me they're the same. So I guess knee-jerk is a better way to put it. Maybe that it's sort of it's I think emotion connected to the fans all feel this way, and then knee-jerk of things are working, let's make it happen. And it's a weird willingness to spend in that one moment, and then sort of a hesitation to do so after the fact. Mm-hmm. But I think if you have a director of football in place, does that hire happen in that moment? I don't think so, because if you remove the emotion, if you remove the knee-jerk aspect of that decision, you look at it, and Solskjaer's not going anywhere. His other job was Molde before this. No one is going to come in and try to snake him from Manchester United. Yeah. He wants that job. So you have all the leverage there versus you see how the season plays out. And I'm not saying that he shouldn't have been hired, or rather I'm not saying he's not the right hire long term. I'm just saying that if you wait and then suddenly they have this downturn in form, you can look at it as, okay, here's your interview. How do you get out of this? How do you resolve it? You've got to get these players to perform until the end of the season. Whereas right now they're locked in, because if he doesn't end up turning this around and they suddenly are in free fall and people want out, then maybe if you hadn't hired him to a permanent deal, you can go and get Pochettino and talk to Pochettino. But I think that's one element there. I feel like I'm about to talk a lot here, because the other one, as you said, it's so now it's Solskjaer who's going to be signing players. It's Solskjaer who's looking at players. And I know that's an oversimplification, but I think it's representative of the truth, which is that they don't have a person who's in charge of long-term strategy and vision. So it does feel like it's going to be Solskjaer giving a lot of input into Ed Woodward, and Ed Woodward making sort of we need a statement signing. And so they're going to throw a lot of money at a person, and clubs are going to know they're going to be throwing a lot of money. And I think if you have a director of football, again, who has a plan in place, who has an idea of what they want to do, then you can sort of build a list and you can look at the 10 players you want. Instead of, we need a central midfielder and we want to sign one right now, throw 60 million pounds at Fred. Why not? And that's the kind of scattershot decision-making that I do think has led to this situation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why I made the differentiation between knee-jerk and emotional decisions, because I see Woodward as sort of an accountant who's not necessarily acting with emotion, but he's not looking past, the horizon very far in terms of the decisions he makes. They're very short term, a lot of them, in terms of throwing money at the problem. But I mean, if we look at, if you don't mind me jumping in there for 1 second, because the accountant thing is the exact right way to put it, because the other thing, you compared them with Man City earlier in the kind of their philosophy and their approach. And I also think it's worth noting, I don't mean this as a negative, but City are not afraid to fail.
And I mean that in terms of their signings, that they do not buy into the sunk cost fallacy, that if they sign a fullback and that fullback does not work, we'll sign another fullback. If they sign Claudio Bravo and he doesn't quite fit, they will sign another goalkeeper.
Who?
They don't, exactly. They don't hold on to these things. And I think the point I made on Twitter today is like, for all this talk of a clear out, Manchester United gave Phil Jones a 4.5-year contract in February. Like there's not going to be this sort of mass clear out, in my opinion, because I think they're hesitant to, after giving people these big deals or sending these big transfer fees, I think there's a hesitation to admit, yeah, we got this wrong. So instead they just keep paying people more and more money and you end up in this situation again. So I think you're absolutely right that the accountant comes into the equation. It's just like he's an accountant at the worst times and then also not accountant at the worst times as well.
Sure. I think I can make sense of that. Yeah, I know what you're saying. And I think we should give full credit to Everton, of course, because it was an absolutely fantastic performance. And they were straight out of the blocks with this one and ran 4 kilometres more than Manchester United in this game.
In the first half.
No,
8 kilometers.
Oh, sorry,
total.
8 in total. Yes, you're correct.
Yep.
Yeah,
which was the damning thing to me. Yeah,
which is even worse. It's twice as much if you run the numbers there. But there was a couple of things. Obviously, a lot of the goals were sort of poorly conceded, and we could talk about how Chris Smalling wasn't marking on that the second goal, and a lot of Matic basically very slowly moving around and not doing what he should be doing in general. But like one of the things that struck me was David De Gea. Of course, he didn't cover himself in glory in this one either, but giving up the captain's armband, yet not leaving the field. That seems like an odd message to me. You don't see that very often.
You do not. And I guess if you have the established hierarchy of like captain, vice captain, third captain, then if you have that order, whichever one of those three is on the field, the highest ranking gets it. So maybe it's just that like level of organization. That said, that's not been very representative of Manchester United this season. I do think Ashley Young has been the captain for whatever reason, so maybe him coming on, he gets it automatically. But I'm with you that it still is this sort of, you're taking it away from this player who has been your best player by far for like half a decade, to take it away at a time when when you're losing, you're making 2 changes. It could not have helped his confidence, especially given that maybe he could have done better on the second goal. It feels just a little bit, again, like it's a kind of short-term decision because things aren't working right, so let's just do this, and then the consequences come later, but those consequences get exponentially worse the more short-term decisions you're making.
Oh, it's a microcosm of Manchester United, isn't it? I think we've just worked it out.
Oh boy.
One other thing I'd like to touch on was Gary Neville in that the post-match interview, which they showed the Sky footage on NBCSN after the game as well. And one of the phrases he used, it was like there were weeds growing around his house. In particular,
much gardening.
Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed
What
at
is
the
that?
club is ruining the foundations. And all I could think of was like, he's having trouble with his gardening, isn't he? This isn't about the club at all. He's got some Japanese knotweed in his garden that's causing him trouble.
I had to stop watching it for a minute to try to process what was happening. Because I too was like, couldn't he have just said weeds? Couldn't he have just said like termites? Like you could have, because the whole point was that it's rotting the foundation. But he has done extensive research to find the exact plant that fits that analogy, or to your point, he's just having an issue with his garden overgrowing into the walls or something like that. I enjoyed that. I did not enjoy as much. So I saw the Sky version, like where they cut back to the Sky panel. And Graham Souness could not have looked happier as Gary Neville was going on his rant. As a United fan, I did not love that. That made it like less pleasant. But I think you're absolutely right to point out that it wasn't just that United were haphazard and all over the place and couldn't complete a pass. That certainly helped Everton. But Everton were the exact opposite of that. And you look at that second goal, that just the swiftness of that counterattack and the entire thing is, like, I hesitate to go with the emotional terminology, but the way Sigurdsson sort of sizes up Matic, gets around him, recognizes that distance isn't going to be closed, that he's got that gap, and just fires it in from distance and completely backs himself. That is so, to me, like such a clear representation of where Everton are in terms of buying into the system, backing Marco Silva, and now here they are, not where they wanted to be probably at the beginning of the season, but in a stronger position that you can see where they're going. And you certainly cannot say that of Manchester United unless the where they're going is down.
No, that goal was
not relegated, but just down the standings.
Lovely finish from Everton, and I'd take nothing away from Sigurdsson there. And I thought actually, on the break there, United's defenders all got back fairly quickly. But then it was just Matic giving him a few yards and also pushing him onto that favourable foot as well. And I was much more critical of United than praising of Everton in that moment, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's about where I was, although that's probably not as surprising. And I will say, but I hesitate to turn this into like the United review show or something. But I brought up I corrected the stats earlier about the distance covered because that was really the damning thing for me. That look, like I know Barcelona don't always run that much because they don't have to. They have possession. So maybe in the first half, if your game plan is sit off, frustrate, counterattack, yeah, you're not going to cover as much distance. But I think when you're chasing in the second half, you make 2 changes at halftime, you're 2 goals down. For that gap to not decrease at all, to stay exactly where it was for United, it really shows how little effort was put in over the second 45 minutes for Manchester United and how hard Everton worked to see that out. And again, this is an Everton team that won't be cracking the top 6. Maybe they're playing for that final Europa League spot potentially, but it was just so telling how up for it they were versus how not up for it Manchester United were.
And I think if you look at this, if you take a step back and you look at Man United here, they're starting with Jones and Smalling and Lindelof and Diego Dalot and Fred. And then your second half saviour plan is, don't worry, lads, Ashley Young and Scott McTominay are coming on. And then you look at sort of other benches around the Premier League and you look at other lineups. It feels terribly underwhelming for a club of Man United's stature, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted then that I remember when United were losing to West Ham under Sir Alex Ferguson, and he brought on, I believe it was Ronaldo, Rooney, and Tevez, I think, as his 3 second-half subs. Slightly different when you've got McTominay and Young coming on and Andreas Pereira at the very, very end. So I will guess there's going to be a lot of investment this summer. I'm hoping as a United fan that a director of football, a qualified, accomplished director of football is one of the positions they first fill, but I will not be holding my breath on that one. So instead, I'll be turning my attention to our sponsor for today, Hims, a wellness brand for men. Forhims.com is a one-stop shop for hair loss, skincare, and sexual wellness for men.
66% of men start to lose their hair by age 35. And once you've noticed that thinning hair, it can be too late. But fear not, because Hims is backed by gosh darn actual real science. Did you know that, Tay-Tay? Science.
I did. And I finally, I had to have Daryl explain to me, why I should take preventative action. Not that I need it, but more so I was like, but if I've already lost it, what do I do? And Daryl's point was like, no. What they're saying is, you like what you have now, right? And I was like, yes. And he's like, yeah. So you use this to keep that, so that what you have now is what you have then. And that was a very good way of putting it. And now I understand.
It's the opposite of Kevin De Bruyne booting the ball out on an injured leg, basically.
Exactly. It's preventative care, and I like it. And I also like that there's no snake oil here. It's not gas station counter supplements. Again, the branding is comforting in the way that you were talking about earlier with SeatGeek and with Robinhood. Yeah. You're aware that it's a qualified, established product that is actually going to do what it says, which is not always the case when you're trusting the internet. But with Hims, you can definitely feel confident in your decisions.
Yeah, definitely one of the big benefits as well is it's online, it's in person. You don't have to have those awkward in-person conversations, no awkward in-person doctor's visits. And we know from previous shows that you like to call up the secretary at the doctor's office and tell her exactly what's wrong with you, your social security number, a list of your fears and all that kind of thing. So you don't have to do any of that. Just come on and log on with these guys and they'll sort you out.
First of all, accurate, but second of all, still hurtful. So our listeners can get started with Hims complete hair kit for just $5 today, right now while supplies last and subject to doctor's approval. See website for full details and safety information, but this could cost hundreds if you went to the doctor or a pharmacy somewhere else. But you don't have to do that because you can just go to Hims' website, which is what, Ryan?
It is forhims.com/total soccer. And that'll get you there, right?
Indeed. That's forhims.com/total soccer, forhims.com/total soccer. Thank you very much to Hims for sponsoring today's episode. Ryan, let's move away from England, shall we? Let's move to the continent. Let's move to continental Europe, where
fancy.
PSG are once again French champions. We were maybe not surprised that they are, surprised that it maybe took this long, given that they could have wrapped this up a couple games ago. Maybe they just wanted to wait for the dramatic game against Monaco, which is El Clasico, or Le Clasico, whatever you want to call it. Either way, they both have money, and PSG won.
That's exactly what happened, yes. And obviously the last 3 attempts they've had to win the league, they were just waiting to do it at home against the team who denied them the league title a few seasons ago. This is
See, you said it good. And I say good for emphasis there.
There you go. So obviously, Kylian Mbappe having a rather good afternoon in this one. A hat trick for him. Lots of talk about where he should go next and stuff. But I just wanted to draw attention to that first goal he scored. The breakaway where I think Diaby, he kind of plays a 1-2 with Diaby and sort of breaks into the box, and lovely first-time finish. Apparently, he clocked 38 kilometres an hour with the run. And if you look back at it, it does look like the footage has been sped up. He is insanely fast, this kid. Incredible stuff.
It's telling to me that you had to clarify which goal with a 1-2 you meant, because not only did he have the 1-2 with Diaby for the first one, he does it again with Dani Alves for the second. And that, to me, is what made these goals stand out. Not just that they were both 1-2s, but that they're so indicative of his movement that, even if you think you've got him locked down on that first goal, he gets the ball around midfield, turns, plays it out wide to Diaby, and then he is on his horse, as you said, or like he gets up to that kilometers per hour, that speed, and then he's able to then slow it down with the first touch. Second touch is the goal, but just how good he is off the ball. Even the third goal, he kind of is making you run towards like the near post, maybe the middle of the goal. Ball goes wide to Dani Alves, corrects and gets on the end of it at the back post. And I really love that third goal because if you watch, he runs across Kamil Glik, the Monaco defender, and it's a thing that like you see a forward do a lot of times when they're on a breakaway of they'll get ahead and then they'll cut across the defender. So it's either going to be the defender has to slow up or the defender has to foul Mbappe or the breakaway player. Otherwise, and then it's going to be a red card. And here it's an impressive feat to cut across Glik so that he cuts off that kind of defensive pursuit, but also manages to avoid any contact, because sometimes that will be like, oh, it was incidental. He ran in front of the defender if it's not the player with the ball. But here Mbappe is able to kind of combine all those things to completely nullify defensive pressure and still manage to score. It's seeing all these little moments that make me think, or like kind of remind me of how good he is, because it's really easy to forget when you see him score 3 goals routinely for PSG in the league.
Yeah. And quite an afternoon for Dani Alves as well, obviously getting the 2 assists. Striker Dani Alves, I should say, because that appears to be what he is now. Playing in an advanced role, it suited him pretty well, I thought. And the most decorated player in soccer history now, if I'm not confused. So Ryan Giggs would be very unhappy about that. I believe he was the previous occupier of that title.
That would not surprise me, and somehow surprise me as well, because 4 of Dani Alves's came with winning competitions with Brazil. Not surprisingly, 23 of them came with his time at Barcelona, but some at Juventus, some in Brazil, some with PSG, obviously. The most decorated player of all time. Dani Alves, congratulations on that. Congratulations to PSG for winning the title. Ryan, do you think it would be difficult for a club to prize Kylian Mbappe away, but the poll you alluded to earlier, 81% of voters, I think over 10,000 voters, said it is now time for Kylian Mbappe to leave. Do you think that happens sometime this summer?
Well, there's an interesting quote that came when he spoke to French television Canal Plus. He said that he'd chosen long-term the PSG project and that he'll only watch Zidane on television. I wonder if he's trying to sort of project something there. I do not know what he's trying to say in this instance. But I think, if he's going to go, it's going to be obviously at Madrid or something like that. And now would be the time for Madrid to make a big money move like that, wouldn't it? It seems like the perfect time. He's ripe for the picking, I'd say.
I mean, I'm assuming he's on some sort of list, but it seems like every player in the world is on some sort of Real Madrid list. So we shall see. I would not be surprised if those rumors continue. So PSG win the league. Bayern and Dortmund both win this weekend. The Bundesliga title race still very much on. Yeah. We'll focus maybe more on that next week. But instead, we want to turn our attentions to Italy. We're not going to start with, let's go ahead and start with Juventus. Why not? They win Serie A yet again. Ronaldo becomes the first player to win the Premier League, La Liga, and Serie A. That said, it is telling to me that I don't necessarily want to talk about them nearly as much as PSG. And I guess it's for some reason, because in my mind they've become the villains, and I don't know if that's just because when you bring in Ronaldo and he kind of already has that unless you love him, you kind of hate him persona. Then there's the off-field stories, the issues in Las Vegas. And I don't think it's necessarily all that. I think it's just that sometimes we look at Juve, I think the media tends to look at them with one lens of, oh, look at them, they're able to do this, and they sign all these players on free transfers, and they don't spend so much money. And then you look at the fact that they're paying, I think, more than double or around double what I think Napoli are paying, as an example. Yeah. So they are able to then spend some cash, bring in in a player like Aaron Ramsey, pay him more than anybody else could. And so a little bit, it does feel like sort of the evil empire continues to win for me. Where are you on Juventus and this Serie A title?
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I mean, it's a unique situation, Juventus and Serie A, because they've got their own stadium, they've got their own revenue through that, and a lot of Italian teams don't have that kind of revenue stream coming in. And obviously they're the biggest team in Italy as well, which helps a lot with that kind of thing. But let's give credit where credit's due. They won the title, and they didn't even have to cheat this time.
See, there you go, zigging and zagging again. But yes, Juve win it yet again. Congratulations to Juventus and Juve fans out there. I'm sure they will not love our analysis of this one, but it is sort of like par for the course, I think, for Juventus. I do wonder if there's a feeling of, like, at a certain point, if you're not winning the Champions League, if just winning the league in such emphatic fashion is enough for Juve fans, if they want to see a little bit of change, if maybe Max Allegri starts getting some offers. I do wonder if Juve fans will be okay if Allegri were to leave, if they brought in somebody who maybe were perceived to be able to push them to that next level.
Well, there's whispers of Conte coming back, isn't there? Which is the person who was famously ousted because he didn't push them to that next level. So that'll be interesting to see how that one turns out.
I think there's going to be a lot of managerial merry-go-round change in Serie A this summer, and I think that may heavily depend on what happens in the final Champions League spots. Inter v Roma, that was billed as the battle for fourth place, the battle for that last Champions League spot. The battle remains after a 1-1 draw between these two. I want to talk about Mauro Icardi, which is maybe not surprising because we tend to always talk about Mauro Icardi. Ryan, does that work for you?
Oh, it works for me. I love talking about that situation. Obviously, he's back. Didn't have he came on in this one, didn't he? But didn't have a massive impact on the game. We saw him come on, and we saw Wanda Metropolitano Stadium giving him a cheer from the sidelines, and had one of his former teammates' children with her as well. That storyline seems to be resolving itself awkwardly, doesn't it?
It does, because he, I believe, did not score in either of their preceding two games, hasn't scored in 3 games from the run of play. He scored a penalty in the first game back. In this game, he's still not on the score sheet, but I do think it was very interesting to me that he comes on in the 54th minute. Inter had several chances, were not able to finish. Vecino especially missing a couple there, and it did feel like suddenly like, ooh, this is going to be a game where Roma are going to be able to snake it. Icardi comes on, and it's the sort of why I think he does continue to get linked with clubs like Real Madrid. He's on that short list as well, supposedly, is that he just comes in and I think because of his resume and how good he is at getting those kind of dramatic goals and finding a way to score, even though he doesn't score in this game, both of Roma's defenders who are anywhere near him are completely focused on Icardi. Fazio and Florenzi are both marking him, including, I think, so Fazio, the right back, I believe, is sort of hanging on him, or whoever the right back is completely hanging on him and leaves Perisic wide open at the back post to get that header. And so, to me, that stood out because even though it's Perisic scoring, even though Icardi doesn't get any sort of statistic because it's a ball from D'Ambrosio, it still is Icardi just simply being there that I think kind of petrifies defenses, and you understand why he is so important to the success at Inter Milan. I think Inter fans can maybe feel a little bit comfortable. Stories came out, I think, on Friday from Wanda Metropolitano, so, grain of salt there, saying that he plans to stay with Inter, that he wants to be there long term, that they have no plans to leave. Again, make of that what you will, because you could see it as he is definitely planning to stay there long term and he's really dedicated, or no, we're totally happy here, even though it's been very contentious and difficult and lots of teams value him, we're happy to be here. I think I might throw that one into the 50-50 column.
Yeah, did they cut off the bit of the quote where he said, "But I'm only watching Zidane on TV," wink, wink, as a la Kylian Mbappe. But yeah, I think it was a good performance.
He said it while wearing a Zidane shirt, is what he did.
Exactly, while mouthing something completely different to what he was saying. D'Ambrosio and Perisic, a couple of good link-ups. I enjoy watching those two working together. I love watching Politano as well. And this seemed like a really big missed opportunity for Roma, didn't it? Because with Milan drawing in 1-1 as well, they could have jumped into the top 4 but didn't take their opportunity there. That was unfortunate for them. Can I also add that in my Yahoo predictions piece, which I write every week, I predicted this game would finish a 1-1. Thank you very much.
How were your predictions overall this week?
I believe I got all the scores right. All the winning teams right, but not the scorelines. This was the scoreline I got right, which I think is pretty good.
Well, good for you. But somehow that doesn't extend to your fantasy team.
That's a long game, isn't it? That's a good game.
I'm sorry to bring up a painful memory. Let's instead talk about Major League Soccer, final segment for today. Two things I wanted to discuss. First off, we're recording this, as I said, Sunday evening, so the DC game, NYCFC game, had not yet finished. Seattle has not yet played LAFC, so we can't talk about those. We are going to talk about one LA team, though, LA Galaxy 2, Houston 1. The major question I want to ask you, Ryan, I know you've watched the footage now. Was that penalty on Zlatan committed by AJ De La Garza for the first penalty of the game? Was it the most obvious penalty you've ever seen?
I don't think I had to watch it twice, to be honest, to discover that, yes, it was incredible. I think that kind of defending, it was amazing. He had his arms around him, proper like a rugby tackle, for a good few seconds. Like, what was he expecting? What on earth was that?
Like, because you'll see a little bit. It's definitely like similar to Morrison, which we talked about earlier for Cardiff, but it's on like some other level because it's on a corner. They're defending a corner, and at no point is he not does he have his arms not wrapped around Zlatan? Like, you can see both arms completely around Zlatan from beginning, like from the ball coming in to Zlatan falling over. Like, are you kidding me? And that De La Garza then gets up and runs over at the referee. Maybe that was like methinks he doth protest too much sort of moment. I'm not really sure. But I have no idea why he was so agitated.
Well, at least with Sean Morrison, you could say, okay, he was doing the Patrick Swayze pottery making because the ball was there in front of Salah. He was trying to get to it. Whereas you say, with this one, he was hugging before the ball came anywhere near the two of them and continued thereafter. So it was just, I just don't know what was going through his mind with that one.
Oh, but the other thing that I thought was really interesting about it was not just that, like, it's a very bad, like, defensive approach and that it leads to a penalty. It's that he kind of does it again for the winner for LA. Scored by Polenta. It's very, very late off of a corner in the 88th minute. And this time it's De La Garza matched up against Polenta, and it ends up being just both of them jumping up. De La Garza gets out jumped, but he never once, if you watch the replay, looks at the ball. He is marking the man the entire time. He's staring at the player the entire time at Polenta, which is an okay approach if you're doing 1v1 defending. But at some point, you got to know where the ball is. And so he's so focused on marking Polenta without, I guess, wrapping his arms around him that he just kind of backs up and stays near him and then jumps when Polenta jumps. But then he's obviously getting out jumped. And that's why I think LA Galaxy wins. So a rough day for AJ De La Garza overall, but I'm sure the Galaxy will be more than happy with his falterings in defense.
Definitely. He's had a bad day. The camera don't lie. You could say that for sure. But I think what we could say also is that De La Garza was he was being rattled by Zlatan for most of this game. I think there was a few off the ball moments. There was a clip you can see on Twitter. I think Pablo Mora put it up where De La Garza wants to pick the ball up to take a throw in, I believe, and sort of Zlatan kicks at him and tries to nutmeg him with the ball. And it's like, oh, this is getting a bit testy. So I think there might have been a bit of chat going on, and definitely it was in his head for this one.
Wait, Zlatan was instigating and trying to get in people's heads?
I
find that incredibly hard to believe.
Right on the touchline in front of all the dugouts as well.
Well, Zlatan is certainly not the only big personality in Major League Soccer. We may have one more returning. There's lots of reports. Make of this what you will. Thierry Henry, rumored to be the next Red Bull manager in New York, I should clarify. That said, from what I have heard and from a few people I've talked to, most of these rumors are coming from Europe. There has not been a lot of confirmation or discussion, it seems like, in the United States within the Red Bull organization, or at least the New York Red Bull organization. That may well change. We may end up seeing Henry managing there, but it is worth noting that right now it is like the European side are saying it's definitely happening, and there seem to be crickets over here. And to me, that's a little bit telling. So Ryan, I won't ask you if you think it's going to happen, because who knows, it may not. More importantly, like, given some of the stuff we've heard about Thierry Henry, especially this week, especially from Alexander Golovin, I'm wondering, do you think this would be a smart managerial appointment for the Red Bulls?
No. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine the meeting? And they're like, we need a manager. We're not doing so well at the moment. You know, 1 point in the last 5 games. It's not so hot at the moment. Why don't we get the guy who took a Monaco team to the bottom of Ligue 1 by January and got fired? Let's get that guy. Why don't we get the guy who, when he was around here, he wasn't the most life and soul of the party fun kind of guy everyone got along with. Why don't we bring him back? Yeah, let's do that. Was that the process?
It must be, and that's why I think it's not just that like the reporters that I trust here in the U.S. are sort of saying, I still don't know about this one. I haven't heard much about it. It's also that it doesn't make that much sense to me because Daryl and I'm not just trying to be negative and like talk mean about Juve and talk mean about Manchester United and then talk mean about the Red Bulls, but like that Henry was a player who we saw on multiple occasions. It just felt like if he got frustrated, it was similar to Pogba. If you could get him frustrated in a moment, he would stay frustrated. And so it did seem like a player who wasn't always like working towards the betterness of the team, but sometimes was just trying to like do what he wanted to do. And if it didn't work out, you could see him getting really angry. And I think that extends to what we now know of him as a manager. Again, I was talking about Alexander Golovin, a YouTube interview this week. Lots of different quotes in here, the abbreviated ones. Maybe he didn't manage to get rid of the part of the player still inside him. When things didn't work in training, he'd get nervous and yell a lot, which was unnecessary. But basically, it sounds like he would end up trying to play in training sessions, that instead of kind of sitting there directing play, directing traffic, making adjustments as you'd expect a manager to do, he would instead, this is Golovin again, get nervous right away, run onto the field trying to show us things, screaming, try to get the ball off me. Mostly the players were calm, but maybe there was some shock. He hadn't fully transitioned into the role of coach. Yeah. That was, again, only a few months ago. These quotes came out this week, or last week rather. So for him to potentially get that job, it does feel like there's going to be a lot of drama in New York if that move happens.
Well, if it does happen, I'll be excited to see how the toddler philosophy of management works out in MLS. It'll be interesting to see. It's obviously what Henry operates for. I will ask you, Tate, have you met Henry before?
I have not.
So at the risk of a huge clang of a name drop here, I have met him. I interviewed him.
I like that. Yeah, I like that you criticize me for mentioning that I have friends, and now you're going to tell us a story about you meeting Thierry Henry. Well, but by all means, continue.
Okay. So it was when I was working for Kick TV back when I wasn't too when they got too cool for me after a little while.
I see.
Too hip. So back in those days, I interviewed him at a FIFA video game launch party. And we've got the camera there. I'm going up to him to approach him for the interview. And so, excuse me, Mr. Henry, blah, blah, blah. Would you like to have a quick word with us? And sort of just looks at me for a couple of seconds of dead air. And is like, okay. And conducts the whole interview without turning around. He just turns his head around. He was watching a TV where someone else was playing a video game, not him. And conducted an entire interview on camera just by turning his head around to me. And I thought,
wow.
That's not the greatest impression you've made on me and the Kick TV viewers right there, if I'm honest.
That's amazing. Was he aware that you were trying to like film him? Did he think it was just you like holding a digital recorder to his face and he didn't take time to check?
I mean, he might not have seen the giant camera being pointed at him and the light which was pointed at him and the microphone I was holding, but you could give him that benefit of the doubt, I suppose. And
I don't think you need to. That's just incredibly surprising to me because I have had experiences in which like a player, if you're doing an interview, if they're not up for like Shea Given, I had one of these where he was talking to somebody in like one of like the preseason friendlies. He just happened to be talking to somebody, I think from Ireland, and I walked over and he did like, a couple quick like snippets with me, but it was me kind of holding the recorder to him. He didn't really look at me that much. He continued to sort of have a little bit of a conversation with the person he was talking to, and then I would ask a question, be like, oh, yeah, it was a good game. I want to do this. Here are my goals for the season, and then go back to his conversation. But I think that can happen when it's just a reporter trying to get quotes. When you're being filmed, you would expect a little bit more of like, oh, cameras are on. I want to make a good impression. That is, it's, I guess, rather telling of Thierry Henry's approach to members of the media. We'll see how that goes over if and when he ends up in New York.
Yeah, it will be interesting. And let's remember, this was a party. He wasn't at work. He could have been nicer.
I mean, I am protective of my Ryan Bailey, so I don't like it, and that won't stand. So if Thierry Henry is ever on the show, I'm going to make him look right at you the entire time. Unbroken eye contact.
Please don't. I can't handle that again. No more of that, please.
All right. No more of that, and I feel like no more of that, please, is a good way to end today's episode of the Total Soccer Show. Ryan Bailey, I know you got a flight to catch. I really appreciate you making the time to be on the show to go over all the action that was from this weekend.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me once again.